Hi, good day everyone. Did you hear the word marginalization? What comes into your mind when you hear the word marginalization? What is marginalization in education? Marginalization is the act of placing a person or thing in a position of lesser importance, influence, or power. It is the state of being placed in such a position. So, in other words, this means criticizing, diminishing, or discounting, or abusing, and so on. So those with special needs often feel excluded from a whole host of educational activities in schools and classrooms in terms of marginalization. Today, we are going to discuss the different learners in marginalized groups. So now let's proceed to the first one, child laborers or domestic workers. International Labor Organization or ILO describes child labor as work that deprives children of their childhood, their potential, and their dignity, and that is harmful to physical and mental development. Child labor is caused by poverty, the lack of education, and the lack of schools. By law, a child is a human being who is below the age of 18, and that is according to the World Counts in 2014. The ILO or ILO on child labor that was presented in Geneva in 2017 noted a big decline in child labor over the years but still presents the following statistics. First, a total of 152 million children to 64 million girls and 88 million boys are in child labor globally, accounting for almost 1 in 10 of all children worldwide. Nearly half of all those in child labor, to 73 million children in absolute terms, are in hazardous work that directly endangers their health and also safety and moral development, of course. Children in, children in employment, a broader measure comprising both child labor and permitted forms of employment involving children of legal working age, and it has a number of 218 million. For the second one of the key results noted in the report is child labor is frequently associated with educational marginalization. This report was the first to acknowledge the connection between education and child labor. It clearly stated that a large number of child laborers are unable to get an education because of poverty, situations of armed conflict, and calamities. Those children who are able to study are emotionally and physically tired from work and are incapable of gaining much from studying in school, more so doing self-study. They also tend to perform below par compared to their classmates in terms of learning achievements, and again that is according to ILO or ILO in 2016. For the third one, in June 2015, the theme of the World Day Against Child Labor was No to Child Labor, Yes to Quality Education. The challenge was to grant free, mandatory, and quality education for all children at least to the minimum age for admission to employment, covering those currently in child labor. There are more dynamic attempts to make sure that national policies on child labor are strong and persistent. This is to ensure that quality child education is available and teacher education is excellent. Nowadays, we are still quite far from the Sustainable Development Goals 8.7 that aims to eradicate child labor by 2020. 2025 or 2025. So this means that there is still so much work to be done, policies to put in place, and of course cooperation among nations to put an end to this.
Hi, my name is Jebby Aligado Intan. I was assigned to report about indigenous people. What is the meaning of indigenous people? Indigenous peoples are distinct social and cultural groups that share collective ancestral ties to the lands and natural resources where they live, occupy, or from which they have been displaced. Indigenous people. There is no commonly acknowledged meaning of the term indigenous people. Jose R. Martinez Cobo's study on the problem of discrimination against indigenous populations presented a working definition of indigenous communities, peoples, and nations, as cited in State of the World's Indigenous People 2010. What can I say about the discrimination against indigenous peoples in the Philippines? The indigenous peoples of the Philippines are ranked among the poorest and most disadvantaged in the country, according to the International Labor Organization or ILO. They lack legal land rights and have higher rates of illiteracy, mortality, and unemployment than the rest of the population. Lack of respect for indigenous people's rights and cultures may lead to discrimination against their traditional livelihood strategies and occupations, and may also be the cause of discrimination against indigenous individuals seeking employment and economic opportunities outside their traditional lands. Study on the problem of discrimination against indigenous populations. After long consideration of the issues involved, the special rapporteur who prepared the study offered a working definition of indigenous communities, peoples, and nations. In doing so, he expressed a number of basic ideas to provide the intellectual framework for this effort, which included the rights of indigenous peoples themselves to define what and who is indigenous. The working definition reads as follows. Indigenous communities, people, and nations are those which, having a historical continuity with pre-invasion and pre-colonial societies that develop on their territories, consider themselves distinct from other sectors of the societies now prevailing on those territories or parts of them. They form at present non-dominant sectors of society and are determined to preserve, develop, and transmit to future generations their ancestral territories and their ethnic identity as the basis of their continued existence as peoples, in accordance with their own cultural patterns, social institutions, and legal system. This historical continuity may consist of the continuation for an extended period reaching into the present of one or more of the following factors. A. Occupation of ancestral lands or at least of part of them. B. Common ancestry with the original occupants of these lands. C. Culture in general or in specific manifestations such as religion, living under a tribal system, membership of an indigenous community, dress, means of livelihood, lifestyle, etc. D. Language. Whether used as the only language, as mother tongue, as the habitual means of the communication at home or in the family, or as the main, preferred, habitual, general, or normal language. E. Residence in certain parts of the country, or in certain regions of the world. And F. Other relevant factors. Working Group on Indigenous Populations. During the many years of debate at the working group, the observers from indigenous organizations developed a common position and rejected the ideas of a formal definition of indigenous peoples that would be adopted by states. Similarly, governmental delegations expressed the view that it was neither desirable nor necessary to elaborate a universal definition of indigenous peoples. Finally, at its 15th session in 1997, the working group concluded that definition of indigenous peoples at the global level was not possible at that time, and certainly not necessary for the adoption of the draft declaration on the rights of indigenous peoples. Article 8 of the draft declaration states that indigenous peoples have a collective and individual right to maintain and develop their distinct identities and characteristics. including the right to identify themselves as indigenous and to be recognized as such. The challenges and efforts to improve education of the indigenous peoples. Indigenous people in the Philippines, also known as Lumad, have a long history of marginalization and discrimination within the education system. Despite the efforts to improve access to education for indigenous communities, significant challenges remain. One of the major issues is the lack of culturally sensitive education materials and teaching methods. Indigenous students may not be able to fully engage with and understand curriculum that does not reflect their own cultural experiences and perspectives, which can lead to a sense of disconnection and disinterest in school, which can negatively impact academic performance. Another obstacle to education for indigenous people in the Philippines is the lack of adequate infrastructure and resources in their communities. Many indigenous communities are located in remote and disadvantaged areas, making it difficult to access quality education. This can include a lack of schools, teachers, and educational materials. In addition to the issues of cultural sensitivity and inadequate resources, indigenous people in the Philippines also face linguistic barriers in education. Many indigenous communities speak languages other than Tagalog or English, which are the dominant languages used in schools. This can make it difficult for indigenous students to fully participate and understand classroom instruction. Furthermore, indigenous students may also face discrimination and stigmatization within the education system. This can include being treated unfairly or disrespectfully by teachers and fellow students, or being held to different standards due to their indigenous identity. This can create a hostile and unwelcoming environment for indigenous students, which can further discourage their participation and academic success. To address these issues and improve education for indigenous people in the Philippines, it is important to adopt culturally responsible teaching practices and materials, as well as provide language support and accommodations for indigenous students. Hence, it is also essential to address and combat discrimination and stigma within the education system. One of the solutions that the Philippine government have implemented to address these challenges and improve the education for indigenous people in the Philippines is the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act or IPRA of 1997. This is to recognize the rights of indigenous communities to their ancestral lands and to the preservation of their cultural heritage. This included the right to education in their own languages and in a manner that recognized their cultural distinctiveness. However, the implementation of the IPRA and other initiatives has been inconsistent and limited, and there is still a need for more comprehensive and effective policies and programs to support the education of indigenous people in the Philippines. In addition, the Department of Education has also implemented programs such as the Indigenous Peoples Education or IPED program, which aims to provide culturally appropriate education to indigenous communities. However, more needs to be done to ensure that indigenous students have equal access to education and the opportunity to success academically.
Once again, good afternoon everyone. So our topic is about abused children. The World Health Organization who defined the child maltreatment as the abuse and neglect that occurs to children under 18 years of age. It includes all types of physical and or emotional ill treatment, sexual abuse, neglect, negligence, and commercial or other exploitation, which results or actual or potential harm of the child health, survival, development, or dignity in the context of a relationship of responsibility, trust, or power. Exposure or intimate partner violence is also sometimes included as a form of a child maltreatment. And now let us proceed to the physical abuse. Physical child abuse occurs when a child is purposely physically injured or put at a risk of a harm by another person. The next is sexual abuse. Is any sexual activity with a child. This can involve sexual contact such as intentional sexual touching, oral, genital contact, or intercourse. And the next is emotional abuse. Means injuring a child's esteem or emotional well-being. It includes verbal and emotional assault such as continually belittling or berating a child, such well as isolating, ignoring, or rejecting a child. The next is medical abuse. Occurs when someone gives false information about illness in a child that requires medical isolation, putting the child at risk of injury. And the next is neglect. Child neglect is failure to provide adequate food, clothing, shelter, clean living condition, affective supervision, education, or dental medical care. And also, child abuse is a serious matter that has direct, extensive, and lifetime effects on children. It may lead to physical harm or impairments. Negatively affects cognitive functioning and socio-emotional adjustment. Weaken the nervous and immune systems and lead to death. That's all for my part. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. I am Kadusali Kimberly Romano. So now, let's proceed to refugees or displaced children. So the United Nations High School Commissioner for Refugees defined refugees as someone who has been forced to his or her country because of the persecution, war, or violence. A refugees has a well-founded fear of persecution for reason, race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership in a particular social group. Mostly, likely they cannot return home because they fear persecution over their race, religion, nationality, beliefs, or membership of a particular social group. Mao jud ni ang main reason sa ilang paglagyo sa ilang nasod. Next is ang internally displaced person. So, an internally displaced person or IDPs is someone who has been forced to flee their home but never crossed an international border. So, these individuals seek safety anywhere they can find it. In urban towns, schools, settlements, internal camps, even forests and fields. So, ang IDPs or internally displaced person, the reasons for their flight may be the same as refuge, but they are still under the protections of their country's government, even if that government caused their displacement. So according to the most recent statistics from UN, there are 21.3 million refugees and 51% of it are below 18 years of age. So far, mao ni siya ang pinaka-highest record since in World War II. Ang refugees and internally displaced children have something in common. They are not in their homes, they are not secure. Then, naay big possibility nga separated jud sila sa ilang pamilya, friends, and also sa ilang community. Sila tong naka-feel nga lonely sila, wala sila gi-treat as a fair. Naa sila sa situation nga dili nila ma-enjoy ang freedom of movement and also freedom nga moadto sa eskwelahan. They are often people from different culture and beliefs. Sila tong nagpuyo sa tent or desolate housings, facilities that are boxed in by barbed wires or fences. Sila tong mga distressed, scared, and uncertain about what is going to happen to them for how long and what their future is going to be like. The present of situation of these children is complicated, and there are not answers to their problem yet. However, other questions are arising. Who or what will be in the future? Will they grow up to be a good citizens of their country? Or will they be the next group of terrorists who will be a burden and threat to the world? Concerns over what will become of these children should be enough to make us to take a serious look at how we can make educations for work for them. So, the declarations of human rights and conventions of child's rights emphasize that education is the right of every person, every child. This means that education policies are in place. So, ang ilang specific objectives ini is it includes ensuring that all girls and boys have access to quality early childhood development, care, and pre-primary education so that they are ready for primary education, eliminating gender disparities in education, and ensuring equal access to all levels of education and vocational training for the vulnerable, including persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, and children in vulnerable situations by 2030. So there are other complications that are hindrances to the quality of education given to these children. So first is the countries that host them are unable to protect refugee rights to education, simply because they themselves have a distended system of education and vulnerable government and economic institutions. Second, because of the length of time refuge and displaced children are in resettlement and refuge areas. Educational resources given to them do not allow for quality education, shifts to accommodate children, overtired teachers, and shorten learning time. Third is language and lack of materials is also a concern. Last is the children who have been exposed to war and violence demonstrate signs of psychosocial problems that are not addressed. So overall, ang kalahian lang jud sa refuge ug ang internally displaced children is that ang refuge manggod is ang person nga nihawa jud sa ilang country. Ni-cross sila sa international border. Unlike sa internally displaced persons, they also flee their homes for safety but have not crossed a border and settled with their own country. That's all.
Hi everyone, I am Lava Rebecca C. So now let us proceed to the part A, which is the children in conflict zones. So as stated here, all wars, whether just or unjust, disastrous or victorious, are waged against the child. So this is according to Eglantine Jebb. For the information of everybody, Eglantine Jebb was born on August 25, 1876 and died on December 17, 1928. So she was a British social reformer who founded the Save the Children organization, and at the end of the First World War to relieve the effects of famine in Austria-Hungary and Germany. So she drafted the document that became the Declaration of the Rights of the Child. So the effects of war or conflict on a child is psychological suffering. So children are exposed to situations or terror and horror during war. War experiences that may leave enduring impacts in post-traumatic stress disorder. Severe losses and disruptions in their lives lead to high rates of depression and anxiety in war-affected children. In December 2018, according to Manuel Fontaine, the UNICEF Director of Emergency Programs, he said that children living in conflict zones around the world have continued to suffer through extreme levels of violence over the past 12 months, and the world has continued to fail them. So for too long, parties to conflict have been committing atrocities activities with near total impunity, and it is only getting worse. Much more can and must be done to protect and assist children. So it is said that children in countries that are at war are being used as human shields, killed, maimed, or recruited to fight. So rape, forced marriage, and abduction have become standard tactics in conflicts from Syria to Yemen and from the Democratic Republic of the Congo to Nigeria, South Sudan, and Myanmar. The children have rights accorded to them by law. So by the Convention on Child's Rights, but is the utter disrespect and disregard for these rights that is brought about by the unresponsiveness of government and even at times connivance with the perpetrators that is causing the child harm. It is also sad to note that other countries are not helpful in solving these problems. And this is also according to Save the Children report in the year of 2019. So in this chapter, there are 6 categories of human rights violations against children, known as the 6 grave violations. So these violations include the killing and maiming of children, the abduction of children, the recruitment or use of children as soldiers, sexual violence against children, attacks against schools or hospitals, and the denial of humanitarian access. So the first 4 are direct acts of violence against children. So when we say direct act violence, this includes the physical or behavioral violence such as war, bullying, domestic violence, and also inclusion or torture. And the last 2 are indirect actions that cause harm to children and directly relate to the health and directly relate to healthcare and health workers. The commission of any of these violations constitutes a breach of international humanitarian law. So despite the laws, the number of children caught in conflict zones is still increasing and many are being deliberately targeted. The way wars are being fought in this present day demonstrates a total disregard for children and schools. This causes both physical and psychological trauma that will have enduring effects. The effect on the children's education is enrollment is going down. A lot of children are dropping out of school. School conditions are bad. There are low levels of educational attainment and abuse is committed. So the question here, is there something that can be done for the children caught in armed conflict? Yes, there is. There have been government and countries that have upheld children's rights. They are firm with their laws and values and look out for the children's welfare and safety. The leaders and governments have important role to play to put a stop to this injustice and violence against the children in armed conflicts. But the responsibility does not stop with them because every person has the responsibility to look out for these children and make a stand for them. But the responsibility does not stop with them because every person has the responsibility to look out for these children and make a stand for them. So that would be all for my part. Thank you.